The blizzard came without warning on the 10th of October in 1882, and Penelope Edwards knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone in these mountains. She had left Lusk, Wyoming that morning under clear skies, determined to reach the high meadow where her father's horses had been grazing all summer. But the first snow of the season had transformed the familiar trail into an unrecognizable maze of white chaos. Her mare had thrown her when lightning cracked across the suddenly darkened sky, and now Penelope stumbled through knee-deep drifts with nothing but her wool coat and the desperate hope that someone might notice she had not returned. 3 miles outside of town, Benjamin Masters was checking the fence line on his family's cattle ranch when he noticed the storm rolling in with unnatural speed. He had lived in Wyoming his entire 26 years and had never seen weather turn so viciously in October. As he urged his gelding back toward the ranch house, something made him pause at the edge of his property where it bordered the trail leading up into the Medicine Bow Mountains. Fresh tracks, already half filled with snow, showed where a single horse had passed heading upward into the treacherous high country. Benjamin knew every family within 20 miles of Lusk, and he knew their habits. The Edwards family ran horses in the summer pastures, and old Thomas Edwards had mentioned just yesterday at the general store that his daughter would be riding up to bring the herd down before the weather turned. Benjamin's gut clenched as he stared at those disappearing tracks. If someone was caught up there in this storm, they would not survive the night. He did not hesitate. Benjamin turned his horse toward home, only long enough to grab supplies, his bedroll, extra rope, and his heavy buffalo coat. His father shouted protests from the barn, but Benjamin was already riding hard into the mounting storm. The snow fell so thick he could barely see his horse's ears, but he kept his eyes on those tracks, following them upward even as darkness began to fall. Penelope had found a shallow overhang of rock that offered minimal shelter from the howling wind. Her fingers were numb, her feet like blocks of ice inside her leather boots. She had tried to start a fire 3 times, but the wind kept extinguishing her matches, and now she had only 2 left. Her thoughts kept drifting to her mother, dead these past 5 years, and to her father, who would blame himself for letting her ride out alone. She should have brought someone with her. She should have checked the sky more carefully. She should have done so many things differently. The temperature dropped with nightfall, and Penelope curled into the tightest ball she could manage, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. She thought about the life she had lived, 23 years of hard work and simple pleasures on the Wyoming frontier. She had turned down 2 marriage proposals, waiting for something she could not quite name, some feeling that the other young women in town described when they spoke of their husbands. Now she would never know if that feeling was real or just a story people told themselves. Benjamin spent that first night searching, refusing to stop even when the darkness made visibility almost impossible. His horse picked its way carefully through the snow, trusting its instincts when Benjamin's eyes could no longer distinguish trail from cliff edge. He called out every few minutes, his voice swallowed by the storm, but he kept calling anyway. Someone was out here. Someone needed help. He would not abandon them. As dawn broke gray and cheerless over the mountains, Benjamin's horse whinnied suddenly, ears pricked forward. Benjamin strained to hear over the wind, and then he caught it, a faint sound that might have been a human voice. He urged his gelding in that direction, calling out again, and this time he heard a definite response. His heart hammered as he pushed through a thick stand of pines and emerged near a rock face, where a huddled figure in a dark coat lay motionless against the stone. Benjamin was off his horse before it fully stopped, dropping to his knees beside the woman. Her lips were blue, her face pale as death. But when he pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt a pulse, weak but steady. Relief flooded through him so powerfully he nearly laughed. She was alive. He had found her alive. "Madam," he said urgently, shaking her shoulder gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" Penelope's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. A man's face hovered above her, framed by a snow-covered hat, his dark eyes intense with concern. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, and his hands were large and warm where they gripped her shoulders. Am I dead? She whispered through cracked lips. Not if I have anything to say about it, Benjamin replied. He was already shrugging out of his buffalo coat and wrapping it around her. We need to get you warm. Can you stand? Penelope tried to move her legs, but they would not respond properly. I cannot feel my feet. Benjamin's expression grew more serious. He looked around quickly, assessing their situation. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and they were still miles from town. He needed to get her warm immediately, or frostbite would be the least of her problems. There's an old trapper's cabin about a mile west of here, he said, though he was mostly talking to himself, working through the problem. If it is still standing, we can shelter there until the storm passes. He lifted Penelope onto his horse with surprising gentleness for such a large man, then swung up behind her. She slumped against his chest, and Benjamin wrapped one arm securely around her waist, holding her steady as he guided the horse carefully down the slope. She drifted in and out of consciousness during that ride, aware only of the warmth of the body behind her and the steady voice that kept talking to her, telling her to hold on, telling her they were almost there, telling her she was going to be fine. The cabin was barely more than a shack, but it had 4 walls and most of a roof, which made it paradise under the circumstances. Benjamin kicked the door open and carried Penelope inside, laying her on the single wooden bunk against the far wall. He worked quickly, his movements efficient from years of ranch work. He got a fire going in the small stone fireplace, thanking Providence that there was still a stack of dry wood in the corner left by whoever had last used this place. Once the fire was crackling, Benjamin turned his attention to Penelope. Her color was slightly better, but she was shivering violently now, which he knew was actually a good sign. Her body was trying to warm itself. He pulled off her wet boots and socks, examining her feet carefully. They were red and painful looking, but he did not see the telltale white patches of serious frostbite. This is going to hurt, he warned her, and began rubbing her feet gently to restore circulation. Penelope gasped as feeling returned in sharp, stabbing waves of pain. Tears streamed down her face, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. The man tending to her worked with practiced care, his large hands surprisingly gentle. As the pain began to subside into a more bearable throbbing, Penelope found her voice again. "Who are you?" she asked. Benjamin looked up, and their eyes met for the first time in the firelight. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that neither could name but both felt deeply. "Benjamin Masters," he said. "My family has the cattle ranch south of Lusk, and you are Penelope Edwards. I have seen you in town." Penelope was surprised he knew her name. She had certainly noticed Benjamin Masters before, though they had never spoken directly. He was hard to miss, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that made people step aside when he walked down the street. She had thought him handsome in a rough, weathered way, but she had never imagined he would be the one to save her life. "You came looking for me in this storm," she said softly. "Why?" Benjamin sat back on his heels, considering the question. "Because someone needed help," he said simply. "And because I could not live with myself if I had not tried." They spent that day and night in the cabin while the storm raged outside. Benjamin gave Penelope his dry clothes to change into, turning his back to give her privacy while she struggled out of her wet things. His shirt hung on her like a dress, and she had to roll the sleeves up several times, but it was warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. He hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry, and made coffee in a battered pot he found in the cabin, adding generous amounts of sugar from his saddlebags. As they sat by the fire drinking coffee, Penelope studied her rescuer. Benjamin Masters had a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. His hands were calloused and scarred from ranch work, and he moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. But it was his eyes that drew her attention most, dark brown and surprisingly kind, with a depth that suggested he thought more than he spoke. Tell me about your ranch, Penelope said, needing to fill the silence with something other than the howling wind. Benjamin settled back against the wall, stretching his long legs toward the fire. It is not much, he said. My father started it 20 years ago when he came west from Missouri. We run about 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. I have two younger brothers who help with the work and a sister who married a shopkeeper in Cheyenne last year. Do you like ranching? Penelope asked. Benjamin considered this. I like the land, he said finally. I like being outside, working with the animals, seeing the seasons change. It is hard work, but it is honest work. A man knows where he stands at the end of the day. Penelope nodded. I feel the same way about the horses. My father thinks I am strange for preferring the barn to the house, but there is something peaceful about working with animals. They do not judge you or expect you to be something you are not. Your father raises good horses, Benjamin said. I bought a mare from him 2 years ago, best cutting horse I have ever owned. They talked through the afternoon, the conversation flowing more easily than Penelope would have expected. Benjamin told her about growing up in Wyoming, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the harsh winter of 1880 when they had lost half their herd. Penelope shared stories about her childhood, about her mother's death from pneumonia, about her struggle to keep the horse ranch running after her father's eyesight began to fail. As evening came on, Benjamin went outside to tend to his horse, bringing the animal into the lean to attach to the cabin sidewall. He returned with more wood and his bedroll, which he laid out on the floor near the fire. You take the bunk, he said when Penelope started to protest. I have slept in worse places than a cabin floor. That night, Penelope lay awake listening to the storm and to Benjamin's steady breathing from across the room. She felt safe for the first time since the blizzard had begun, and it was a strange feeling. She had prided herself on being independent, on not needing anyone's protection or help. But lying there in the darkness, wearing a stranger's shirt, and alive only because that stranger had risked his own life to search for her, Penelope felt something shift inside her. Perhaps independence and connection did not have to be opposing forces. Perhaps strength could include knowing when to accept help. The second day dawned with the storm still fierce. Benjamin assessed their supplies and rationed out food carefully. They had enough for several days if necessary, but he knew people in Lusk would be worried. Search parties might come looking, though he doubted anyone could make it through this weather. They would have to wait it out. Penelope's feet had improved dramatically, the circulation restored, though they were still tender and bruised. She insisted on helping Benjamin prepare their simple meal of beans and salt pork, and they ate sitting close to the fire, their shoulders nearly touching. Tell me something about yourself that nobody knows, Penelope said suddenly. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. That is a strange question. We are trapped in a cabin in a blizzard, Penelope pointed out. If not now, when? Benjamin smiled, and Penelope realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. I write poetry, he admitted. Bad poetry, mind you, but I write it anyway. I have notebooks full of terrible verses about mountains and cattle and sunsets. Penelope laughed with delight. A cowboy poet. I would never have guessed. Your turn, Benjamin said. Tell me something nobody knows about Penelope Edwards. Penelope thought for a moment. I'm afraid, she said quietly. All the time. I am afraid of failing, of losing the ranch, of disappointing my father. I am afraid of making the wrong choices, of ending up alone. I act strong because I think that is what people expect, but inside, I feel like I am constantly on the edge of falling apart. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. I think that is what courage actually is, he said. Being afraid, but doing what needs to be done anyway. You rode up into these mountains alone because your family needed you to. That is not weakness. That is strength. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words until Benjamin spoke them. "Thank you," she whispered. Benjamin reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You are going to be fine, Penelope Edwards. The storm will pass, and I will get you home safely. I promise you that." The simple touch of his hand sent warmth through Penelope's entire body, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She looked at Benjamin and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. He felt it too, this connection that had formed between them over the past 2 days. It was more than gratitude, more than the natural intimacy of shared danger. It was something deeper, something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. Benjamin seemed to realize he was still holding her hand and released it quickly, looking away. "I should check on the horse," he said, though they both knew the horse was fine. The third day of the storm tested them both. The cabin was growing cold despite the fire, and their wood supply was running low. Benjamin went out into the blizzard to search for more, returning an hour later, covered in snow, but with an armful of branches he had managed to break off a dead tree. His hands were raw and bleeding from the work, and Penelope insisted on tending to them. She sat close to him, carefully cleaning the cuts and wrapping them with strips torn from her underskirt. Benjamin watched her work, studying the concentration on her face, the way her dark hair fell forward over her shoulder, the delicate strength in her fingers. He had known many women in his life, but none who affected him the way Penelope Edwards did. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was brave and honest and funny, and being near her made him feel more alive than he had in years. "Penelope," he said softly, and she looked up at him, her hand still cradling his. "Yes?" Benjamin struggled with the words, unused to expressing emotions he usually kept locked away. "When we get back to town, I would like to call on you properly, if that would be acceptable to you." Penelope felt her heart skip. "I would like that very much," she said. Benjamin lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we have only just met, truly met. But I feel something when I look at you, something I have never felt before." "I feel it too," Penelope admitted. "It terrifies me." "Me too," Benjamin said, and then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and questioning, but it sent electricity racing through Penelope's veins. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. "I have been wanting to do that since yesterday," Benjamin confessed. Penelope laughed, giddy with emotion. "I was hoping you would." They spent the rest of that day in comfortable closeness, talking and sharing stories, stealing kisses by the firelight. Benjamin told Penelope about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to improve the herd and expand into horse breeding as well. Penelope shared her ideas about training methods she had read about in agricultural journals, techniques that relied on patience and trust rather than force. They discovered they both loved to read, both preferred coffee to tea, both thought Lusk was the most beautiful place on earth despite its harsh conditions. As night fell on the third day, the wind finally began to die down. Benjamin stepped outside and reported that he could see stars through breaks in the clouds. The storm was passing at last. "We will leave at first light," he said. "If the weather holds, we should be back in Lusk by afternoon." Penelope felt a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving the cabin. Here, they existed in their own world, separate from the expectations and complications of real life. Once they returned to town, everything would change. People would talk. There would be judgments and questions and social proprieties to navigate. But as she looked at Benjamin's face in the firelight, she knew she wanted to face all of that with him. They left the cabin just after dawn, riding double on Benjamin's horse through a transformed landscape. The mountains gleamed white under a brilliant blue sky, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The temperature had dropped even further now that the clouds had cleared, and Penelope was grateful for Benjamin's warmth at her back, his arms steady around her as he guided the horse down the treacherous trail. They reached Lusk just after noon on the fourth day. The town seemed to materialize out of the snow like a mirage, its handful of buildings looking more welcoming than any palace. As they rode down the main street, people came running from doorways, shouting with excitement and relief. Thomas Edwards burst from the general store, his weathered face crumpling with emotion when he saw his daughter. "Penelope, thank God!" He helped her down from the horse, crushing her in a fierce embrace. "I thought I had lost you, girl. I thought the mountains had taken you like they took your mother." "I am fine, Papa," Penelope said, hugging him back just as tightly. "Benjamin saved me. He came looking for me in the storm." Thomas turned to Benjamin, who had dismounted and stood holding his horse's reins, looking uncomfortable with all the attention. "Benjamin Masters," Thomas said, gripping the younger man's hand hard. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You brought my daughter home." "Any one would have done the same," Benjamin said quietly. "But you were the one who did it," Thomas insisted. "You risked your life for 3 days in that blizzard. That is not something I will forget." Dr. Morrison insisted on examining Penelope, declaring her remarkably healthy considering her ordeal. Her feet would be tender for a while, and she needed rest and warm food, but she would make a full recovery. Benjamin's parents arrived at the doctor's office, his mother weeping with relief that her son had survived his dangerous rescue mission. "We were so worried," Martha Masters said, embracing her son tightly. "Your father wanted to go after you, but the storm was too fierce. We could do nothing but wait and pray." "I am fine, Ma," Benjamin assured her. "And Miss Edwards is safe. That is all that matters." Over the following days, the story of Benjamin's rescue spread through Lusk and the surrounding ranches. People spoke of it with admiration and respect. How Benjamin Masters had ridden into a deadly blizzard to save Thomas Edwards's daughter, how he had tracked her through whiteout conditions and kept her alive for 3 days in a trapper's cabin. Some of the older women gossiped about the impropriety of 2 unmarried people spending 3 nights alone together, but most folks figured surviving a blizzard trumped social niceties. Benjamin came to call on Penelope 3 days after their return, dressed in his best shirt and clean trousers, his hair slicked back with water. Thomas Edwards invited him in with genuine warmth, and the 3 of them sat in the parlor drinking coffee and talking about horses and cattle and the early winter weather. When Thomas excused himself to check on the evening feeding, Penelope walked Benjamin to the door. They stood on the porch in the crisp evening air, their breath making clouds in the cold. "I have been thinking about you constantly," Benjamin said, taking her hand. "About us. About what happened in that cabin." "So have I," Penelope admitted. "Benjamin, I know this is all very fast, but what I feel for you is real. It is not just gratitude or the intensity of the situation. When I look at you, I see someone I could build a life with." Benjamin's face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. "I feel exactly the same way. Penelope Edwards, I am not a man of fancy words despite my terrible poetry, but I know my own heart. I am falling in love with you, and I want to court you properly and see where this leads us." "I would like that very much," Penelope said, and kissed him softly. Over the following months, Benjamin became a regular presence at the Edwards Ranch. He came for Sunday dinners, helped with the horse training, and spent long evenings talking with Penelope by the fire. Thomas watched with approval as the relationship deepened, recognizing in Benjamin the kind of steady, honorable man he had always hoped his daughter would find. Benjamin and Penelope rode together through the winter landscape, bundled in heavy coats, their horses picking their way through snow-covered trails. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Benjamin shared his poetry with her, reading aloud from his notebooks, while Penelope listened with genuine appreciation. She shared her own dreams of expanding the horse operation, of breeding animals known throughout Wyoming for their quality and temperament. "We could do it together," Benjamin said one day, as they sat in the Edwards barn watching a mare with her new foal. Combine our operations, your expertise with horses and my cattle operation. We could build something substantial. Penelope looked at him carefully. Are you talking about a business arrangement, Benjamin Masters? Benjamin took her hand, his expression serious. I am talking about marriage, Penelope Edwards. I am talking about building a life together, a future together. I know it has only been a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to marry you if you will have me. Penelope felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Benjamin. I think I started falling in love with you in that cabin, maybe even before, and I have not stopped since. Benjamin kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and passion and joy. The mare nickered softly in her stall, as if offering her blessing, and somewhere outside, a crow called across the winter sky. They were married in April of 1883 in the small church in Lusk, with the entire town in attendance. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in cedar, and carried wildflowers that Benjamin had ridden into the mountains to collect. Benjamin stood at the altar in a new suit, his brothers beside him as groomsmen, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Thomas Edwards wept openly as he gave his daughter away, but they were tears of happiness. Take care of her, he whispered to Benjamin. With my life, Benjamin promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The wedding celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, and more food than the small community had seen in months. People toasted the happy couple, retelling the story of how they had met during the first snow, how Benjamin had searched for 3 days straight and saved Penelope's life. It had already become something of a legend in the area, the kind of romantic story that people would tell for years to come. Benjamin and Penelope began their married life in a new house they built together, on land between the Edwards Horse Ranch and the Masters cattle operation. It was a simple but sturdy structure with a wide porch that faced the mountains, those same mountains that had nearly killed Penelope but had ultimately brought them together. They worked side by side every day, combining their operations exactly as they had discussed. Benjamin handled the cattle while Penelope managed the horses, but they consulted each other on every major decision, building not just a ranch, but a true partnership. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They argued sometimes, both of them strong-willed and opinionated, but they learned how to fight fair and how to forgive. They weathered a harsh winter and a dry summer that tested the grazing lands. They dealt with predators and market fluctuations and all the countless difficulties of frontier life. But through it all, they faced everything together, and their love deepened with each challenge overcome. On a cold February night in 1884, Penelope went into labor. Benjamin paced the parlor while the midwife attended to his wife, terrified by the screams coming from the bedroom. When he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife emerged smiling. You have a son, Mr. Masters. A big, healthy boy. Benjamin entered the bedroom to find Penelope exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. Look what we made, she said softly, tears streaming down her face. Look at him, Benjamin. He is perfect. Benjamin sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny person they had created. He is beautiful, just like his mother, he said, kissing Penelope's forehead. What should we name him? I was thinking Thomas, Penelope said, after my father, Thomas James Masters. I like that, Benjamin agreed. Thomas James Masters. Welcome to the world, son. Thomas Edwards was overjoyed to have a grandson bearing his name. He spent hours at their house teaching the baby about horses before the child could even hold his head up, making plans for all they would do together. Benjamin's parents were equally delighted, and the baby was showered with love from all sides. 2 years later, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Martha Rose after Benjamin's mother. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination, and she had both parents wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. Young Thomas was initially skeptical of this intruder, but quickly became fiercely protective of his baby sister. The ranch prospered over the years. The Masters Edwards operation became known throughout Wyoming and beyond for producing exceptional horses and high-quality cattle. Benjamin's careful breeding program and Penelope's training methods created animals that commanded premium prices. They hired good hands to help with the work, including a young drifter named Sam, who proved to have a gift with horses that rivaled Penelope's own. As their children grew, Benjamin and Penelope made sure they understood the value of hard work, but also the importance of education. They ordered books from back east, and Penelope taught both children to read and write and figure. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with animals, following his mother around the corrals and absorbing everything she taught him. Martha Rose, meanwhile, displayed a head for numbers that impressed even her grandfather. On their fifth wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Penelope back to the mountains, riding up the trail she had taken that fateful October day. They found the trapper's cabin still standing, weathered but intact. They went inside and built a fire in the old fireplace, sitting close together as they had done that first time. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come looking for me?" Penelope asked. Benjamin pulled her closer. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of losing you, of never having had the chance to know you and love you, it is unbearable. But I did come looking. I found you, and we built this beautiful life together." "You saved me in more ways than one," Penelope said. "I was so lost before I met you, Benjamin. Not just physically lost in the mountains, but lost in my life. I did not know what I was looking for until I found you." "We saved each other," Benjamin said. "That is how love works, I think. We make each other stronger, braver, better than we could be alone." They made love in that cabin, gentler now than in the early days of their marriage, but no less passionate. Afterward, they lay wrapped in their blankets, watching the fire burn down to embers, talking about their children and their dreams for the future. The years passed with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Springs brought new foals and calves. Summers meant long days of hard work under the endless Wyoming sky. Autumns were for gathering and preparing for winter, and winters tested their endurance and resilience. Through it all, Benjamin and Penelope stood together, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. Thomas Edwards passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1891, surrounded by family. He had lived to see his grandson turn 7 and his granddaughter reach 5, had seen the ranch he founded flourish under his daughter's stewardship, and had died knowing Penelope was loved and cared for. At his funeral, Benjamin spoke about the quality of Thomas's character, about the legacy he left not just in horses and land, but in the values he instilled in his daughter. "He taught Penelope to be strong," Benjamin said, his arm around his grieving wife. "He taught her to work hard, to be honest, to stand up for what is right. And in doing so, he shaped not just her life, but mine as well, and our children's lives. That is a legacy that will endure for generations." Penelope grieved deeply for her father, but she found comfort in Benjamin's steady presence and in watching her children play in the barn that her father had built. Life continued its forward momentum, as it always does, carrying them through sorrow and back into joy. In 1892, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. She was 33 now, and the pregnancy was harder than her previous two. She spent the last months on modified bed rest, frustrated by her enforced inactivity, but understanding the necessity. Benjamin took over more of the horsework, consulting with her daily about training decisions and management issues. Their third child was born in December, a tiny girl they named Catherine Ann. She was smaller than her siblings had been, and for the first few weeks everyone worried whether she would survive. But Catherine proved to have an iron will despite her delicate appearance, and she quickly gained weight and strength. "She is like her mother," Benjamin said proudly, watching as the infant grabbed his finger with surprising strength. Small but mighty. Thomas, now 8, and Martha, now 6, adored their baby sister. They fought over who got to hold her, who could make her smile first, who she loved best. The house rang with laughter and occasional arguments, with the sounds of a family growing and thriving. As the children grew older, Benjamin began teaching them about the ranch, just as his father had taught him. Thomas took to it naturally, learning to rope and ride, to read the weather, and understand the land. Martha Rose was more interested in the business side, keeping meticulous records of expenses and profits even at her young age. Catherine, as she grew, showed an artistic temperament, drawing endless pictures of horses and mountains and her family. Penelope and Benjamin made sure their children knew the story of how they had met, how love had bloomed from tragedy and danger. On snowy evenings, they would sit by the fire and tell the tale, sometimes embellishing details, always emphasizing the values that had brought them together: courage, determination, compassion, and the willingness to risk everything for someone in need. Your father rode into a blizzard to save me, Penelope would tell the children. He risked his life for someone he barely knew. That is the kind of man you should aspire to be, Thomas, and the kind of man you should look for, Martha, Catherine. Someone who acts with courage and kindness, who does what is right even when it is hard. And your mother survived 3 days in the mountains with nothing but her own strength and will, Benjamin would add. She never gave up, even when things looked hopeless. That is the spirit you need to face life's challenges. The children absorbed these lessons, carrying them forward into their own lives. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man, known for his skill with horses and his quiet integrity. Martha Rose became a shrewd businesswoman, eventually taking over much of the ranch's financial management. Catherine pursued her art, selling paintings of Wyoming landscapes that captured the harsh beauty of their homeland. In 1903, on a warm spring evening, Benjamin and Penelope sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They were both in their 40s now, with lines on their faces and gray threading through their hair, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love in a trapper's cabin 2 decades earlier. "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked, "that you married a simple rancher instead of someone more exciting?" Penelope laughed and took his hand. "You are many things, Benjamin Masters, but simple has never been one of them. And as for excitement, I have had quite enough for one lifetime, thank you. I got lost in a blizzard, spent 3 days wondering if I would die, and had my life turned completely upside down by a stubborn cowboy who refused to let me freeze to death. That is all the excitement any woman needs." "I was serious, though," Benjamin pressed. "Are you happy? Have I given you the life you wanted?" Penelope turned to face him fully, her expression tender. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed: a partner who respects my opinions and my abilities, children who bring me joy every single day, a home filled with love and laughter, adventures both big and small, and most importantly, you have given me yourself, your love, your loyalty, your presence. I am happier than I ever imagined possible, Benjamin. Every single day I am grateful that you came looking for me in that storm." Benjamin kissed her, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared experience. "I will always come looking for you," he promised. "No matter what storms life brings, I will always find my way back to you." As the years continued to pass, the Masters Ranch became a cornerstone of the community. During hard times, Benjamin and Penelope were known for their generosity, offering work to those who needed it, extending credit when times were tough, sharing resources with neighbors facing difficulty. During good times, they celebrated with the community, hosting gatherings and helping younger ranchers get established. Their children grew and began forging their own paths. Thomas married a teacher from Cheyenne, a smart, funny woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the eastern section of the ranch and began raising their own children, giving Benjamin and Penelope their first grandchildren. Martha Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with a traveling salesman who proved to be far more than he first appeared, a Harvard-educated man who had come west seeking adventure and found love instead. Catherine moved to Denver to pursue her art, but returned home frequently, always bringing stories of the wider world beyond Wyoming. Through all the changes and challenges, Benjamin and Penelope remained each other's constant. They had built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch, but a true partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and deep, abiding love. They had faced drought and disease, economic downturns, and personal losses, but they had faced everything together, and their love had never wavered. In the spring of 1910, on the anniversary of their marriage, Benjamin took Penelope on a ride into the mountains. They were both in their 50s now, moving a bit slower than they once had, but still strong and capable. They rode to the meadow where Penelope's mare had thrown her all those years ago, the place where her journey into the storm had truly begun. "I think about that day often," Penelope said, as they sat on their horses looking out over the vista. "How terrified I was, how certain I was that I would die. I could never have imagined that getting lost would lead to finding everything I had been searching for." "I think about it too," Benjamin said. "I remember seeing those tracks disappearing into the storm, and I remember the feeling I had, like I absolutely had to follow them. At the time, I thought it was just a sense of duty, of doing what was right. But I wonder now if some part of me knew, even then, that you were out there waiting for me." "Do you believe in fate?" Penelope asked. "That we were meant to find each other?" Benjamin considered this. "I believe we make our own fate through the choices we make. I chose to ride into that storm. You chose to keep fighting to stay alive. Those choices brought us together. But I also believe that once we found each other, we were always going to fall in love. That part felt inevitable, like recognizing something I had always known but never experienced." They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, their horses walking side by side as they had done countless times over the decades. The ranch house came into view, solid and welcoming, with smoke rising from the chimney and lights glowing in the windows. Their family was there, gathered for the anniversary celebration, spanning 3 generations now. That evening, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Benjamin stood and raised his glass. "27 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "I made the best decision of my life. I rode into a blizzard looking for someone who needed help, and I found the other half of my soul. Penelope Edwards, now Penelope Masters, has been my partner, my best friend, my love, and my inspiration for all these years. She has made me a better man, a better father, a better human being. So I want to thank her, in front of all of you, for choosing to build this life with me." Penelope stood and kissed him, tears streaming down her face. "And I want to thank you," she said, "for never giving up, for searching for 3 days straight, for finding me when I was lost. Not just lost in the mountains, but lost in life. You showed me what love could be, what partnership means, what it feels like to be truly known and truly loved. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when you appeared out of the storm. Thank you, Benjamin Masters, for saving my life in every way that matters." The family applauded, and the celebration continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren begged to hear the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met, and Benjamin and Penelope told it one more time, still finding new details to emphasize, still marveling at how a chance encounter during the first snow had changed the course of their lives. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Benjamin and Penelope stood on their porch under a sky full of stars. The mountains loomed dark against the horizon, those same mountains that had nearly claimed Penelope's life, but had instead given her everything she held dear. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Penelope said softly. "I think about all the small choices that had to align perfectly for us to meet. If I had left an hour earlier or later, if the storm had come in differently, if you had chosen to stay home instead of checking that fence line, any one of those things could have changed, and we never would have found each other." "But they did not change," Benjamin said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. We did meet, we did fall in love, we did build this beautiful life together, and I would make every one of those same choices again in a heartbeat. They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something lasting and true. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of approaching spring, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Years continued their steady march, bringing new joys and new sorrows, as years always do. Benjamin and Penelope weathered them all together, their love the anchor that kept them steady through every storm. They celebrated marriages and births, mourned losses, adapted to changing times, and watched as the world around them transformed. Automobiles began to appear on the roads. Electricity reached even remote ranches, and the wild frontier of their youth gradually gave way to something more settled and civilized. But some things never changed. The mountains still stood eternal and beautiful against the Wyoming sky. The ranch still demanded hard work and dedication, and Benjamin and Penelope still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt in that trapper's cabin so many years ago. In the summer of 1925, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The family had grown large and sprawling, spreading across Wyoming and beyond, but the ranch remained the heart of it all, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. "Look what we built," Penelope said to Benjamin as they watched their descendants playing in the yard. "Look at all these people who exist because you came looking for me in a storm." "Best search I ever undertook," Benjamin said with a smile. "Though I admit the 3 days of searching were rather uncomfortable at the time." They were both old now, in their 60s, with bodies that ached and protested more with each passing year. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, still felt the spark that had ignited between them in that cabin. Age had not diminished their love, but had instead deepened it, adding layers of shared experience and understanding that only decades together could create. As the sun set on that anniversary evening, Benjamin and Penelope walked slowly to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat in the rocking chairs they had bought years ago, holding hands as they had done countless times before. "Do you remember what you said to me in the cabin?" Benjamin asked. "About being afraid all the time?" "I remember," Penelope said. "Are you still afraid?" Penelope thought about this. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I am afraid of losing you, of one of us leaving the other behind. I am afraid for our children and grandchildren, hoping they will make good choices and find happiness. But I am not afraid the way I used to be. You taught me that fear does not have to be a prison. It can be a reminder of what matters, of what is worth fighting for." "You taught me something too," Benjamin said. "You taught me that the biggest risks often bring the biggest rewards. I risked my life riding into that storm, but I gained everything that makes life worth living. You taught me that love is worth any risk, any hardship, any challenge." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere inside, their family was laughing and talking, continuing the celebration without them. But out here in the quiet, it was just the two of them, as it had been that first night in the cabin, as it had been through countless nights since. The story of Benjamin and Penelope became a legend in Wyoming, passed down through generations. People told it as an example of courage and love, of how one person's decision to help a stranger in need could change multiple lives. Schools taught it as a lesson about the values that built the West: bravery, perseverance, and compassion. Families shared it as a reminder that the best love stories are not about grand gestures, but about steady commitment, about choosing each other day after day through good times and bad. Benjamin and Penelope lived into their 70s, spending their final years surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had nurtured. They passed within months of each other, Benjamin going first in his sleep during a cold January night, Penelope following that spring as the wildflowers began to bloom in the meadows. The family buried them side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and dates, and one line that said everything that needed to be said. Together always. The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, the Masters Edwards legacy enduring long after its founders were gone. The house they built still stood, expanded and modernized, but retaining its essential character. The barn still housed horses descended from the animals Penelope had trained. The land still produced cattle bearing the combined Masters Edwards brand, and on snowy winter evenings, when the family gathered around the fire, they still told the story of how it all began. They told about the young woman lost in the mountains during the first snow, about the cowboy who searched for 3 days straight, about the love that grew from those desperate circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. They told it so their children would know where they came from, what values their family held dear, and what was possible when you chose courage over fear and love over loneliness. The trapper's cabin where Benjamin and Penelope had sheltered eventually collapsed under the weight of too many winters, returning to the earth from which it had been built. But the story lived on, growing and changing with each telling, but always maintaining its essential truth: that love can find us in the most unexpected places, that heroes exist in everyday people who make the choice to help others, and that the greatest adventures are the ones we undertake together. Years became decades, decades became a century, and still the story persisted. Great-great-grandchildren who had never known Benjamin and Penelope still felt connected to them through the tale of their meeting, the values they had embodied, the love they had shared, the life they had built together. All of it continued to influence and inspire long after they were gone. And somewhere in the mountains of Wyoming, on the anniversary of that first snow, some swore they could still feel a presence, a warmth in the cold wind, as if the spirits of Benjamin and Penelope still wandered those trails together, still searching, still finding, still loving as they had done in life. Whether true or merely legend, it was a beautiful thought, a fitting end to a beautiful story, a reminder that some loves are truly eternal, transcending even death itself to become something more than memory, something approaching magic in a world that often seemed too harsh and practical for such things. The sun set over the Wyoming mountains as it had done for millions of years, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere below, the ranch continued its daily rhythms, animals bedding down for the night, lights coming on in windows, families gathering for evening meals. Life continued its eternal dance, generation following generation, but the foundation remained strong, built on the love of two people who had found each other in a storm and had chosen to weather every storm thereafter together. And that, in the end, was the truest part of the story, the part that resonated across time and touched every heart that heard it. Not the dramatic rescue or the 3 days of searching, though those were important, but the simple choice to love, to commit, to build something lasting in a world of impermanence. Benjamin and Penelope had shown that such love was possible, that it could endure through decades and difficulties, that it could create ripples extending far beyond two individual lives. Their story was Wyoming's story, the West's story, America's story, the human story written small and specific but containing universal truths. We all get lost sometimes, the story said. We all face storms that threaten to overwhelm us. But if we are lucky, if we are brave, if we remain open to possibility, even in our darkest moments, someone might come searching, someone might find us, and that meeting, that connection, might transform everything that follows, turning what seemed like an ending into a beginning, what felt like loss into discovery, what looked like death into life abundant and rich and full of love. The story of Benjamin Masters and Penelope Edwards was ultimately a story of hope, of resilience, of the incredible power of human connection to redeem and transform. It reminded people that heroism could be found in simple acts of compassion, that love could bloom in the harshest conditions, and that the best legacies were not measured in wealth or fame, but in the lives we touched and the love we shared. And so the story endured. passed from generation to generation, changing in details but constant in its essence, a beacon of light in darkness, a promise that we are never truly lost as long as someone is willing to search, a testament to the enduring power of love to conquer fear, distance, and even death itself, binding two souls together across time and space in a union that nothing could sever.